In this video, I'm going to share with you how I use Scale Master inside of 3D-Coat. So like a lot of you out there, I use multiple 3D programs in my pipeline, and sometimes getting the scale right between those applications can be a little bit problematic. Now we have inside of 3D-Coat the 3D-Coat app link, and that works very well with different applications. But I prefer to look at things in a little bit more of a manual way and have a little bit more control rather than having a plugin doing the backwards and forwards movements of assets between these programs for me. So let's take a closer look. Now in one of my earlier videos, I looked at scale and measurement in this video here. However, 3D-Coat now uses the Scale Master, and this is a really good addition and helps to solve, at least for me, a lot of the issues that I was even having in this video. Let's start this journey inside of Blender. And this is a default opening scene in Blender, and we have our default cube. So I'm going to use this cube as a measurement. But first of all, I want to know what size this cube is. So I'm going to choose orthographic view, and I'm going to go into the x-axis, and I'm going to zoom in on this cube. So I'm going to use the measure tool and just click and drag and just move this across. And we're looking at a 2 meter cube here. So I want to use a measurement of 1 meter, and I want to throw that 1 meter cube in and out of different programs, eventually ending up into 3D-Coat to test that compatibility between the unit of measurement. So now I've reduced the scale by half. So let's use our measure tool now and just check our new size. So there's our old size, click and drag, and let's just drag across. And now we've got a 1 meter cube as we'd expect. So let's use this cube now as our unit of measurement and throw this in a few different programs now and see if we have consistency throughout those programs. So I'm just going to save this out as cube 1 meter blender. Enter the name, I'm saving it out as an OBJ, and I'll just export that file. And there's my cube ready to go. When I'm doing my modeling and character work, I tend to use LightWave 3D. And you can see that LightWave 3D has a grid system. And down here in the bottom left-hand corner, you can see that the grid is set to 1 meter, which essentially means that each of these grid divisions here is a 1 meter grid size. So that makes it easy for me now to measure and understand my scale inside of LightWave 3D. So let me load in the object. And here's my object, the cube 1 meter blender file. I'll just bring this in, and to test this I'm just going to zoom in a bit, change the tool over to the move tool, and just place this over this grid, and we can see there that we have a match of 1 meter. So that tells me that Blender and LightWave have a common unit export here of 1 meter. So let's try and take this same object now into 3D-Coat. So here I am in 3D-Coat, and I'm in the modeling room. I'm going to go to Mesh, Import, and I'm going to choose my 1 meter blender file. And you can see here that it's brought that file in, but it seems to be very small at the moment. Now I know that that cube is 1 meter inside of Blender and also in LightWave, but here it seems to be very small. So the first thing I'll do here is just apply that. You can see it's given me the default cube from Blender with the UV layout. And I'm going to go over to Edit, Scene Master, and with these default settings, I'm just going to scale this up now. So I'll hit Scale Up, and I'll do it the same again, and I'll say Close. And now, if I go to my orthographic view here, I'll select all the faces of my cube and go to Transform. If I move this over now, you can see that it matches the grid of 1 meter. So I know that my object is 1 meter, and I know that my grid now is 1 meter, because as you can see, it's fitting inside of that grid. Let's reset the position of the cube back into the center, turn this around, And let's measure this cube now. So let's go over to our measure tool just to check. So now with my measure tool, my units are set to meters, and I'll just click and drag across. And you can see that my cube is 1 meter. Let's just escape that tool. And I can drop these units down here. So we've got 1 meter. Let's go to the top here and let's measure the distance across here. And that's 1 meter too. So now I've got a consistency on my grid size and also my object size of 1 meter. And that's now compatible with both Blender and LightWave. So now I've got a good base for using models and moving between those two or these 3 programs. Okay, let's remove those measure lines on there and let's create a new object now inside of 3D-Coat and move it back into those other programs. So I'll go to spacebar and I'll choose 3D primitives and I'll just choose a cube again. And you'll see now, if I just drag this over here, 3D-Coat places the primitive in at this small size, and the size it's bringing it in is 0.3 of a meter. So I need to change that size now to 1 meter. And now I have my 1 meter cube. Let's apply that one and let's drag another one out here. And this time I'm going to create a 2 meter height on this cube. So I'll just hit 2 and I'll drag this up just so it's level with the other ones. And I'm going to increase the subdivision just so it puts an extra subdivision line roughly at the 1 meter mark there. And let's say apply. So now I have 2 objects here which have been generated inside of 3D-Coat at a height of 1 meter and a height of 2 meters. Let's get rid of this cube object here. I'm going to hit select object, and I'm just going to click on this object, which is my Blender cube, and I'm going to hit delete. So now I'll just select everything that's on this layer here, and I'm just going to move it over roughly into the center again, like so. Okay, well, let's give these cubes, let's call these objects underscore 3D-Coat. With them selected, I'm just going to quickly export these out. So I can either go to File, Export Poly Object, or I can go to Mesh, Export Selected, which is what I'll do. And I'm just going to save these out as low poly 3D-Coat objects. So I've got a low poly version of those there. And what I want to do now is, because one of the powerful features of 3D-Coat is its ability to do sculpting both in voxel mode and also in surface mode. So I'm just going to convert these low poly objects that I've got here into high resolution sculpt objects. And let's, just for the sake of argument, pretend that we've done some really amazing sculpt work on these and we want them to be at a set height that we've already created, or a set size that we've created here and established. So first of all, I'm going to just subdivide these objects first of all. So I'm just going to hit subdivide a couple of times just to give me a lot of geometry in there. And then I'm going to go over to mesh, and I'm just going to convert this now into a sculpt object. And I'm going to give it a lot of subdivisions in the sculpt. And you can see it's put it into my sculpt tree here. And what I'll do now is I'll just unlink that. And essentially what this does is it is currently using my model in here and creating a version of that, a sculptable version of that inside of here. But I want to just make a sculpt version of it. I don't want to have an attachment to the model, so I have to detach that. So I'm just going to say unlink the sculpt mesh from this polygon object here. Okay, and you can see it's updated here and it's just said unlinked. So let's just jump over to my sculpt room now. So I'm in the sculpt workspace now, and you can see those two objects. These are high resolution versions of the same object. I'm going to use my measure tool, and I'm just going to click and drag across, and we can see there we've got 1 meter. Okay, let's escape that one. Let's move over here and let's go and drag upwards here. And we can see here that we've got 2 meters. So these are the same size, but now they are high resolution sculpt objects. And if I go to wireframe mode in here, we can see that resolution there is extremely high. So what I'll do now is I'll export these high res objects out, these sculpt objects, export scene, and I'm just going to call these ones cubes, high res, and they've come from 3D-Coat. Now it asks me if I want to decimate these down to a more manageable size. I will, and it's asking me if I want to reduce it from 737,000 and roughly half that to this new amount. I'll just say don't decimate for now. Okay, let's now jump back over into LightWave and see if it's exported at the correct resolution. So here I am in LightWave, and I'm going to say load object, and I'm going to start off with this low poly 3D-Coat object. So here's my object. We can remember we had a 2 meter high and a 1 meter cube. Now I'll just quickly change the surface on this one, and what I can do here is I'll just compare this now with my original Blender file. So my Blender file is still open. I'll go to my layers panel, and we can see here's my original Blender file, and I'm just going to put that in the background so we can see that's this black wireframe here. And with these new objects in the foreground, I'm just going to use that and just match that up just to test that my cube is in fact matching correctly, which it is. So I know that if my 1 meter cube is matched, then I know that my cube with a height of 2 meters is going to match as well. Okay, let's bring in the high res object just to double check everything's okay. So I'll load in my high res. This one will take a little bit longer as it's extremely high res, and there it is. You can see that because I've created this very high resolution object, it's rounded those corners out a little bit more. So let's put that cube back into the background again, the Blender cube, and this time I'll move over that high res object and try to get that one to fit. But there you can see that now my high resolution sculpt object is 1 meter, is conforming to the height. Now it isn't exactly, because this has been rounded out because it's such a high resolution object, and it's basically subdivided this over and over again, and as it's done that it's shrunk. But if I would have sharpened the edges up inside of 3D-Coat, we would have had an exact match. So over here inside of LightWave, I'll use a measure tool as I've done in the other applications, and I'll just move over here. Let's give ourselves a bit of room, and I will just measure from one side to the other, and we can see that we've got a length of 1 meter. And again, look down in this area if you couldn't find it. We'll go across and we can see the length of 1 meter. And over on this side, so here's my 2 meter, and there we go, it's 2 meters, just eyeballing that there. So this is really useful. It's really useful to use that scale master inside of 3D-Coat, because that's going to enable us to work seamlessly with our 3D applications, with our other 3D applications. Let's go over into Blender just as one final check. File, import, and let's import those files. So let's bring in our low poly object. Now there's a shading error on this because I exported with smoothing on inside of 3D-Coat. But here we can move this across here inside of Blender and we can match that up. So I generally use LightWave to do a lot of my rendering. So I need to make sure that whatever I get out of 3D-Coat is going to be at the right scale for my rendering engine. Now, there are plugins inside of each of the apps, as I mentioned before, that handles all of this for you. However, it's very good for you to understand how to do this manually and how to get around any scaling issues you can for your projects. Anyway, I hope you found that useful. See you next time.